All right, cool. So we were starting STLC. So this is our responsibility, right? As a tester, we do our testing, and in terms of where we sit in SDLC, SDLC stands for Software Development Lifecycle. This is where we sit, system testing phase. And here we perform these activities, which is nothing but STLC process, software testing lifecycle. Last week, we talked about analysis of the requirement. First phase of STLC, then we talked about creating test plan. Anyone have any questions about test plan? Is test plan clear to you guys? Are there any confusion about test plan? All right, while I find a test plan, if you have any questions, please feel free. All right, so let me go back to test plan. Let me explain a little bit more about test plans. Okay. Okay, so this is the test plan, right? What is a test plan? It's a detailed document which explains how the entire testing will be done. Simple, nice and simple. Everybody understand this too, right? Cover page, table of contents. Then introduction, purpose, scope. All right, let's start from scope. Introduction, we understand. Purpose, we understand. What is scope? Scope is something, right? It will define what are the different type of testing in scope, right? Last week, I think we talked briefly about scope. So in the scope section, you want to lay out all this different type of testing is supported and also part of this project. So you'll be saying like in scope testing, out of scope testing. And right now it will not make sense to you because you don't know what are the different type of testing. But when we get there, we will talk about it. So I'll just leave it at that. Test approach. What would be your test approach and environment, things like this, you're going to be defining here. Test entry and exit criteria. These are two things that will be asked in your interview questions. When you talk about test plan, they're going to ask you, what is test entry criteria? If you mention test entry criteria as part of your explanation on test plan, they will ask you what is test entry criteria. So test entry criteria is pretty much everything you need before entering your testing. Before you go test an application, you need to have a checklist. You need to have to-do item, and those needs to be fulfilled before you enter your testing. And what are those? For example, you need a computer, right? You need a computer before you test. You need network before you start testing. You need the application, right? The application you're gonna test, you need to have that application and you need to have access to it before you start testing. You need what are the things you need? You need testers, right? Obviously yourself and any other testers that you have, you need those as well. You need test data. Some cases you will require to have test data. Some cases you don't need test data. For example, if you're working on an application that has authentication or user login, you need those details, the user credentials and things like this. Or let's say you have a banking application and that has payment system and that requires for you to make payments. Those information, like let's say whether it's credit card or whatever it is, those information is nothing but test data, and you need to have them available before you start your testing. Before you start your testing, you need your requirement document. How would you test without a requirement document? Those needs to be in place. Then also you need your test plan. Before you start testing, your test plan document that needs to be there so that you can carry out your testing. You need your test cases document before you start testing. Without that, you will not be able to test. So these are your checklist before you enter your testing, and these are part of your test entry criteria. Test exit criteria. So once test entry criteria is defined and met, and you're done your testing, now you are in testing mode, and once the testing is done, how do you exit out of testing? Everything has a checklist. So basically your test exit criteria has to be met before you exit out of your testing. As part of your test exit criteria, you would have and that would be defined in your test plan document itself. So for example, things like you need to execute each and every test cases. You learn about test cases. Some of you know, some of you don't know. Right after test plan, we're going to go learn test cases. So it will make more sense once you learn test cases. But in terms of test exit criteria, I'm just letting you know what are the things you need. So test cases, you need to execute each and every one of them. So test cases are nothing but test execution, meaning testing the application as a whole, as entirety. So those has to be fully completed. And then all the bugs, right? All the bugs that you log, once you're doing your testing, you'll find errors, issues, and bugs. Those bugs has to be retested and closed. And what else? Test entry, test exit criteria. If there are any open bugs, that needs to be brought up to the management and accepted. Meaning, like, there could be some open bugs before you exit out of testing, but those needs to be brought up to the management and the client or whatnot. As long as you bring it up to your management and report it, and if they say, okay, we understand we have the bugs, but we don't think is major bugs, so we're okay with this, we're going to move forward to the next environment, knowing we have some medium or low priority bugs. So those are the things you need to make sure that that you kind of bring up and get accepted. What else in terms of test exit criteria? I can't really think of anything else, but if you guys remember something, let me know. Test acceptance criteria. So this is something would be predefined. Like I said before, we can have some minor bugs, and those bugs may or may not be fixed, but client or the product owner, they are okay with those. They can say, okay, you know, we are fine with having, depending on the size of the application, they can say that, okay, as long as we don't have any blocker bugs, high priority bugs, medium bugs, we are fine with low priority bugs. There could be like 5, 6, 7 low priority bugs, and they could be okay with that. So there are some exception criterias can be defined early stage, that okay, we'll be fine if we are running out of time, and if we have some bugs, we're fine with that. So this is something can be predefined and agreed on as part of the acceptance criteria. I don't know if there are any other acceptance criteria I can talk about, but I think we have some written in the description which we can review. The next things are test deliverables. So test deliverables are the documentation, the evidence that you provide during your testing. For example, test cases, test plans, defect report, things like this that you would be delivering during your testing. Like any sort of evidence or documentation you would be delivering during your testing to support this project or support this activity is part of your test deliverable. Test schedule, obviously, these are the timeline defined roles and responsibility we all know. And what else? Environment, acronyms, risk. So I think risk is something worth spending a couple of minutes here. So when, as a QA, you need to understand what are the risks associated this project and in terms of testing. So there could be different type of risk, and you need to mention that early stage. For example, communication could be a huge risk. If you work in a team and the communication is not done properly, that would be a huge risk. Proper communication is required by all parties in order to be successful as a team. So that's something you can define. You can say, hey, if we are not communicated properly, that would be a risk. Because let's say if something happens and let's say there's a change in the requirement, and those gets talked about in the high level hierarchies with the project manager and business, but they never bring it up to your attention or your team's attention, that would be a huge risk, and it happens a lot. So what happens a lot of time, there could be a change in the requirement and they'll just talk about it internally. In some cases, they'll let the developer know, like whoever that one individual working on this particular functionality, they would just talk to that person and not let everyone know. And that person has the knowledge and he makes the changes, but no one else knows, and that is a huge risk. This is just one example. Many communication related risks are there, and that's something you need to that's something you need to list out there. Any communication needs to happen, that needs to happen with everyone, and the communication should be clear. Next risk is requirement. If the requirement is not given, if proper requirement is not given, that would be a huge risk. If the requirement is not defined properly, that's a risk. Also, if requirement is changing frequently, that's a risk too. So things like this. Other risk would be the timeline. If you don't have the timeline that they define, like we don't define timeline, but whatever the timeline they define for the project, if this doesn't make sense, if you don't have enough time for testing and developing and reviewing and everything, that's a risk. And that's something that you need to kind of highlight here. Other risk would be, what is it? Environmental risk. What else? Okay, I think we have a couple of things written on in the description. We'll review it, but I think I have highlighted the major risk and major point. So let's see if there are anything else written here. And test entry criteria. Yeah, these are the things I mentioned. Entry criteria. Okay, this is another thing important worth mentioning. You need an integration testing before you enter your testing, right? As part of test entry criteria, you need to make sure that unit and integration testing is done, and this two type of testing is done by the developers. So we talked about this briefly. As a QA, we perform functional testing. We perform our testing on that application. But before we receive that application, there are a couple of testing is done on that application by the developers. One is unit, one is integration, and these are nothing but testing done on the code level. Like when we perform our testing, we'll be performing testing on the UI level. When I say UI, user interface, right? So let's say this application. If we're testing this application, we'll be testing this application here, right? And if the developers are testing this application, they will test it in the code level. You know how the code is written in Java or TypeScript, C#, whatever the language they use. Their testing is done on the code level, and we test on the UI level. So that's the difference. Okay, so these two testing must be done. If they do not perform these two testing, that's mean that application was not tested at all by the developers, and there would be risk. And this is the checklist for exit criteria.
Sorry,
Deadline met. Sorry, go ahead.
question. Yeah, quick question. So you mentioned the unit and the integration testing. So even as QA, we still have to highlight that in our test cases, even though we only test the user interface part and the coding is basically their part. Sorry, the coding is basically their department. Do we still have to highlight that in our test case?
Test plan, you mean, right?
Yes, sorry, yes, the test plan.
Yeah, we need to. So the reason you need to highlight it here because a lot of issues gets addressed here. Like when they're performing in unit integration testing, first level of bugs, first level of issues gets caught here, and they fix it. Now, if they do not perform these two testing, that's mean the quality of your application must be really, really bad. And you want to avoid that as a tester. You want to get as good, you want to get the best possible product to you, shipped to you, so that you don't end up spending so much time testing. The way you avoid it is ensuring that developers have performed unit integration testing.
So we only highlight it as we're testing it for the first time, or do we go back and change it every time we test it again?
So unit and integration testing would be done by them every time when they are giving you a new build. So new build will have new functionality. So it's not tied to how many times you are testing, it's tied to how many times they're delivering new functionality to you.
And that's after we report all the bugs and all the fixes that need to be made.
No, that's before. This is the first step. First step is to build the application and test them internally by the developers and send it to you.
Okay.
Once you receive that application, then you perform your testing, basically.
No, thank you.
I also have a question. How would you know whether they completed the unit integration testing? How would you know that?
Very good question. Very, very good question. So that's something they have to, so depending on the company, they have to perform it and they have to provide you with the evidence. In some cases, they would just say, okay, we perform unit integration testing and it looks good from our side. But for you and I, depending on the company we are working in, we can have a mechanism to kind of understand what they have done and to what level of unit integration testing they have done. So I can just show you, give you a quick example here. If I, okay,
and while you're showing that, from my understanding, the test plan, I think from the last class you said that generally a QA tester would not be creating the test plan, it would be provided for them. But let's just say you have an opportunity to create a test plan. For each one of these, I guess, steps here, you would be working with various stakeholders to develop this plan, and it would probably take quite a bit of time just to create the plan. Is that correct?
There is multiple part to your question, but sure, and go ahead. I want to understand the actual question.
Yeah, so my question is just, I just kind of want to understand that I'm really understanding like the level and the deepness of a test plan. Yeah, the test plan. So it's a document that you would create, but it would take you several days or weeks to create this, correct?
It will not take you several weeks. It would be days of efforts, and ideally, in most cases, it will be done by multiple individuals. So, all right. So ideally, your test lead should create your test plan. But in your interview, you don't want to say that I did not create a test plan. My lead always created a test plan. Do not ever say that. So it depends on IT. So IT industry is not standardized. Each company works differently. So you can be in a situation where you never have to create test plan. It will be given to you by your test lead because he has overall idea. You might be working in one part of that project, but he's working on the project as a whole, the entire project. So he has proper understanding who's where and what is the schedule, what are the risks, what are different type of requirement, what are the entry criteria and exit criteria, everything. He probably have better idea than you, so he would create it. But the other thing is every single company has a process in place, and the structure is there, the template is there. So all you need to do, you just need to tweak it a little bit to update that test plan to make it so make it ready for your project or your sprint, whatever you're working on. Now, I worked in different environments where I never had to create a test plan. The lead or manager created a test plan, but also I worked in different company where we collectively create a test plan. So we would just assign this task to 3 or 4 individuals saying, hey, you work in different part and complete the test plan. So it would take roughly a day or 2. But ideally a test plan, it's if one person is working on test plan, at least 3-4 days worth of effort, but that doesn't mean that these 3-4 days you are only working on test plan. You'd be spending a good chunk of your day working on the test plan while you're working on other areas like your meetings, your requirement understanding and things like this. Hope that makes sense, but never say that test plan is something is always created by the project, the QA manager or QA lead, and you never worked on that. So we want to be able to differentiate that and avoid this kind of answers.
Thank you very much. That was a very clear explanation. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I think someone asked about unit and integration testing, how it is done and how do we know if that is done. So this is what we have done in my company, right? We have a tool, right? So Bitbucket is a tool that we use to do deployment and stuff, right? And also we use Sonar Cloud. Sonar Cloud is another tool. So don't get confused, guys. I'm just showing you something that you may or may never have to use, but this is something that would give you visibility on unit test coverage. So if you look at this one right here, it says the coverage, right? So this is unit test. So this is nothing but unit test, and it's showing the details of what has been done in unit test. So the coverage, in terms of coverage, when it comes to unit test, your coverage will never be 100%. So this coverage, you're seeing the functionality that they built, they have tested 84% of that functionality. And the red mark, like the remainder of those, like they could not test due to whatever reason. There will be some challenges for them to perform testing on the code. It's hard to do. It's not easy, so probably it was not testable. Now, as part of their unit test, they found 5 bugs. You can see right here, they found 5 bugs, and code smells, right? 130, meaning those area of code is written and is good, but can be better. Things like this. Duplications, so 1% code is duplicated. So this is the overall view of your unit test. As long you see your unit test coverage is more than 70%, you should be good. If the coverage is less than 70%, depending on the company, right? Our company standard is 80%. Your company would define like when developers, they build a functionality, they must perform unit test, and the company will define like what is the coverage should be like. Is it 50%? or is it 90%? It will never be 100%. So that's, you should be happy with something around 70% or up. So this is our company. They're doing their unit test using this tool called Sonar Cloud, so that the entire project can have visibility on that. Hope that makes sense. Moving on. So we talked about unit integration testing. We talked about test exit criteria. So how do you exit out of testing when the deadline is met, requirement and functionalities are covered, test cases executed and passed, all the bugs are fixed and closed, no high priority or severity critical bugs has been left out. All right, let's see what's written for test acceptance criteria. Yeah, I think I mentioned it before. Test acceptance criteria said, for example, so test acceptance criteria are sets of predefined condition that needs to be met in order to accept the story as complete. For example, software will be acceptable to the client only if there are no critical defects or no high defects, no medium defects, only a few. Here it says 2, but that number can change. Only a few low defects open. Yeah, so this we talked about it, and it's common sense, right? You know, if you're accepting an application, you want to make sure that application does not have any critical bugs. That's part of your test acceptance criteria. It's predefined conditions, basically. We talked about risk, right? You know, requirement changes is a risk. Team member lack of requirement skills of testing. So this right here is saying, like, if you hire someone without proper QA or testing knowledge, that's a risk. Tight schedule is a risk. Poor management skill. I would avoid saying that. I would avoid saying poor management skill. Miscommunication, environmental crash, wrong budget estimate. So these are the risks you can define in your test plan. Let's see what else. Test deliverables. Tools. All right, done. Actually, this is it. Test plan is done. So we're moving on from test plan. Do you guys have any questions?
So Kader bhai, being a tester, do we need to know any kind of the language which we are building the software in? Like if
No,
we
you
are
don't. We don't need to know any type of programming language. If you're talking about programming language, no, you don't need to know any type of programming languages. But if you know a programming language, it gives you advantage. You don't need to. You will not see their code. You will never see their code. Code is stored safely somewhere. They will never give you access to your code, the application code, because you know it's not only developers has access to the code. No one else sees the code. So we can talk about knowing programming language. If you know or basics of a programming language, you could do a lot more with that. You don't code, you don't need to code, but you could do a lot more with that. We'll talk about it later. Again, you don't need to know, but if you learn basics of a Java, let's say basic of Java, you could do so much with it. You could perform automated testing, like the testing that you and I would do here. Like if you're testing an application right now, what would you do? You're gonna go click here, log in, like Ashok was doing. You're gonna go here, log in, right? And then you will navigate through this application. You'll verify these applications, things like this. But if you are, this is admin, sorry. But if you know a programming language, what you can do is you can automate those, and a tool would do it for you. You don't need to do anything manually. You can avoid those manual steps and you can do it automatically, and it will save you time and money and effort.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, moving on. And now, next thing is, what is the next thing? Next thing is test cases. So once you're done with your test plan, the next phase is test cases. So what is test case? Test case is, let's scroll up a little bit. Let me show you your STLC. It's all right here, right? STLC test plan is done. The next focus area is test cases. And so this one is so important. I cannot talk enough about this one. This is system test cases. So as a tester, you need to create test cases in order to perform your testing. So what is test case? Test case is nothing but step-by-step process to test an application or a software product. And I'll show you what it is and how it is done in a second. So I think the definition is written here. Test case, step-by-step process of testing a requirement or an application, same thing. Test case, a sets of action executed to verify particular feature or functionality of software application. A test case contains description, test steps, test data, expected result, actual result, status date created by. All right, let me show you a template of a test case. So test case is nothing but step-by-step process of testing an application. So let's say this application, right? This application you need to test. So before you test this, you need to record it in a document. This is a process oriented job. QA is process oriented job. So you need to follow the process. Just by saying that you as a QA that you have performed testing and everything looks good is not acceptable. So you need to document that. You need to follow the process. Okay, I'll show you a template. So this is a template of your test cases. You can see the header, it says test case class 6, but this is really class 5. So zoom in, let me know if you guys can see this. All right, so you will have your test case number, descriptions, steps, expected result, actual result, status created by, and date. So this is a template of your test cases. Now, what do you do with this? How do you create your test cases? Where does the test case comes from? Anyone have any idea where does the test case come from?
From the requirement?
Yeah, test cases are driven from the requirement. So let's look at a requirement. We can look at this requirement, right? This is a dummy application. We can look at this requirement. Let's see if this is functioning. So this is a dummy application, and we have defined a couple of requirements. So requirement, RQ stands for requirement 001. First requirement, user shall be able to navigate through home page to sign on page. So what is it there? Is they're saying? So they're saying user should be able to come to this home page. So this is the home page. And what is it? Sign on page. Sign on right here. Right? What's this? Add. So that's the requirement. Basically, for this application, users should have the ability to navigate from home page, which is this, to the sign on page. So it's like two-step process, just a couple of clicks here. Now, whenever you're defining a requirement, you need to mention the supported browsers as well for this requirement. So for this requirement, your supported browsers are last versions of Chrome and Edge only. So you're saying for my application will be supported by Chrome and Edge only, nothing else. So that's your requirement. Okay, so requirement 001, user shall be able to move to navigate to sign-in page. Basically, supported browsers are Chrome and Edge, right? Then you have another requirement 002. You're saying sign on page, on sign on page. When you're on the sign on page, this page shall have below text displaying. So you're saying once you're in sign on page, these messages will be displaying on that. Right? So let me look at this application. So you're on sign on page and these are the messages. These are your requirement. So let's work on these two requirement. So first requirement, let's go to first requirement. Let me know if the requirement is clear, guys, before we move on to creating test cases. This is your application URL, and this is your first requirement. Let's work on the first requirement. User shall be able to navigate to the home page using this. So for this one, first we need to understand how many scenarios can we create, right? So this is your requirement as a whole for this requirement, basically requirement 001, that's your requirement ID. Now we need to break it down as a user, as a tester. First, you need to break it down as a user, like how do I get there? This is happy path. You're just going to click on this one, and then you're going to click on the sign-in page from the home page. That's the happy path. That's the user journey. Now, as a tester, you need to think outside the box. You need to see, okay, what more can I do to make sure, to ensure that this requirement is tested properly and is not going to break and it does not have any bugs. So to do that, you need to create scenarios. You need to create test cases. You need to execute them, and then you need to report, basically. So let's just do a couple of things here, right? So I'm going to create my test scenarios, right? So test description. Okay. So this would be test case, right? So it would be, we can just do THC 001. That's my test case 001 for the same requirement, basically. I think we should create another column here for the requirement. So this would be requirement number, and the requirement is what? RQ001. RQ001, and this is the first test case. So when you're defining your scenarios, you want to say, okay, let's verify user is able to navigate to the home page. So now this requirement has a browser defined, so we can say Chrome browser. So let's test it for Chrome browser. Verify user is able to navigate to the home page and then sign in page using Chrome browser. Okay, fine. Now this is your one scenario, right? Looking at this, I really think we can only perform two tests. One is using Chrome, one is using Edge, maybe three. Okay, so let's do this. So let's copy this and make, okay. Guys, if you have any questions, input, let me know. So this one would be for Edge, right? So two scenarios. And the third one, we can talk about it in a second. So this would be your second scenario, and your test case still would be the same. So either we can do this or we can do something else. Okay, so same requirement, two test cases. One is for Chrome, one is for Edge. Now, what would be your steps? Now, your steps are how do you get there? Basically, the steps you take to get there. So your step one would be what? What do you guys think?
Click on the link.
Before you do that, you need to open the Chrome browser, right? Open the Chrome browser. Your second step would be enter the URL, right?
Right.
URL. And what is the URL? Everything you do, sometimes it may sound silly. You need to record every little details because that's just what it is in the industry. Sometimes it may sound silly, but you need to do that. And then what is the next step? Open the Chrome, enter the URL. What is your next step?
Press enter.
Press enter. What is your next step?
Go to the home page or open home.
Homepage is done automatically, right? What happens here when you click on this? You're already you landed on the homepage, right?
So is it go to sign on?
Yeah, click on the sign on page, right? Click on the sign on button or whatever that is. Click on the sign on link. That's the link. So this is a link. What is your fifth step? So this is the end of it, right? This is where you want to be. You want to be on the sign on page.
Right.
So that's it, right? Your steps are done now. On the fifth one, you can say, you can simply copy this so this is what you want to verify, right? You can simply just copy this, verify user is on the sign on page. Verifies users on the sign on page. Yeah, this is fine. So this is your fifth step. This is where you're verifying that user is on the sign on page using Chrome browser. What are you expecting?
If it is coded right, then we will be on the sign on page after doing all these steps. We will verify that it worked.
You're expecting users on the sign on page.
Right.
We can just copy this. I'm expecting that user is on the sign in page using Chrome. That's all. We are not going to go to actual result. We're not going to go to status. We're not going to go to created by, or we could put created by, but no, leave it like this, all right? Because we're just designing. Understand, when we're working on the test cases, there are two parts of it. One part of designing test case, which is still here, expected result, and the other part is executing it. Today, we're not going to execute, we're just going to design. So this part is execution of it, right? So we're not going to talk about this. Now here, this is one part of it. Now, by looking at the requirement, you think we need to perform any other scenarios or we are good to go?
Yes.
Yes, we need to perform more scenarios, right?
Right.
Okay, so more scenarios, basically we just need to cover the other browsers, supported browsers. So we can just copy this, right? All we need to do, just change this to Edge. We just need to change this to Edge, right? Okay, done. So we cover whatever is mentioned in the requirement here. Do we need to perform any other scenarios or we're good to go?
We should cover. We should.
Tell me.
I have a
So we can
question.
Firefox, if it works
Yeah.
on Firefox, then it's not built right.
Okay. Someone has a question.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing, that should we test on another browser that is not mentioned in the requirement, and also document the result?
Yes. So ideally, if I'm the business owner or I'm the IT company, I really don't care as long Chrome and Edge works, because this is what we want to test, and this is where our application must be supported. But whenever we are doing any type of testing, we need to think about negative scenarios. By looking at this one, we really don't have any negative scenarios. Ideally, I don't care if my application supports other browsers as well. I really don't care. But as long it supports our supported browsers, that's all we really care about. But again, I don't really have, for practice purpose, I don't have an example of a negative testing for today's class. So we're going to assume that this application should not support another browser, whether if it's Safari or Firefox. Let's say Firefox. So I can just imagine a requirement where I'm saying that my application shall not be supported by Firefox. So we're going to write that scenario here. Hope that makes sense. But it's not a real negative scenario, because really nobody cares which other browsers is being supported or not. As long my browsers that I mentioned should be supported, that's what our concerns are. But for this practice purpose, for this requirement, I do not have any negative scenarios, but so we are going to perform this negative scenario here. All right, so we're going to use this one, verify user is not able to navigate. So we can just, user is.
Sorry to disturb you. I think some people are complaining that it's getting too late.
For me, it's too late too. It's 6:30 a.m. No.
I know, I'm actually enjoying it. You could go on and I could listen to you for another half an hour.
Yeah, we're gonna end. So sorry, for me it's 4:40 a.m. I just heard the time, so I'm gonna have to go to prayer as well. So we're gonna end it in 5 minutes, guys. Okay, so thank you for letting me know. All right, the requirement stays the same, right? Same requirement, but we're adding a different scenario, which is negative scenario. Verify user is not able to navigate to the homepage using Firefox.
So in practical life, so we should not create this.
No, I would not worry about this. You need to come up with better negative scenarios. This is not a better negative scenario. Functional negative scenarios. The test cases we're going to spend next week as well. So you'll understand, like, real negative scenarios and things like this. And we're going to write test cases. We'll have a project. We'll do a project, live project, and we'll have more practice done. So here, what is it? Verify user is not, right? Verify user shall not, or something like that. Verify user shall be. What just happened? Okay, so this is a negative scenario. You're just saying user shall not be able to navigate to the home page using the Firefox. User is not, the user does not have access, something like that. Access to the sign-in page using Firefox, something like this. So basically, this is your negative scenario, and it's covered here. Okay, fine. Anything else, guys? Does the test case make sense to you guys? Can you guys think about test cases when you see a requirement, how to create a test case, how to create different scenarios out of test cases? So what I'm going to do, I know it's getting late. What I'm going to do is I'll give you guys this one right here, a requirement of a pen, a ball pen with a cap. Company name is IT Solutions. These are your requirements. Please read through it, understand it, create as many scenarios that you can. I'll give you everything I have here, this Excel sheet that we worked on just now together. I'll also give you a video. Watch that video a couple of times. It's going to help you come up with good scenarios, very, very good scenarios. It'll make you a good professional tester. So as a tester, this must be your expertise. Must know, must understand how to create test cases, how to come up with different scenarios, things like this. So what I will do is I will give you everything that I have here so that you can come up with different scenarios and test cases. Questions, concerns?
No,
Sorry,
nothing.
I couldn't hear you guys. All right, I'm gonna stop recording. It's late. Feel free to drop, guys, if you need to drop. But if any one of you have any questions, let's talk about it.